Chapter 61, Magicians. Translator, Novel_Saga Editor, Novel_Saga. Brother, just a moment, the handsome janitor replied with a smile. There was another janitor behind him. He turned around and walked over to one of the shelves. Then, he took out 3 blue porcelain bottles from above. He then returned and handed over those bottles to the handsome janitor. The handsome janitor then gave the 3 porcelain bottles to Shi Mu. Shi Mu's right hand moved and hit the bottle's cap as soon as he received them. He wrinkled his brows as a strange aroma entered his nostrils. Shi Mu took a quick glance and saw a soybean-sized pill inside. The pill was bright red in color. It was undoubtedly the same bone-tempering pill which was mentioned in the art of breeding heavenly elephants. A joyous look flashed through Shi Mu's eyes as he saw this. He paid the money excitedly and slipped the bottles in his bosom. Suddenly, a vigorous male voice was heard from behind him. "Brother Bai, it seems that your friend has chosen the art of breeding heavenly elephants." Shi Mu's complexion changed. He turned around and found 2 people standing behind him. One of them was a youngster with a sturdy physique and a straightforward appearance. The other person was Bai Shi, the youngster with long hair. "Brother Shi, this is our senior fellow disciple Huo Mao. I met him recently. He's my fellow villager," Bai Si introduced the youngster with a smile as he saw Shi Mu sizing him up. Shi Mu felt dumbfounded as he heard these words. Xiao Ming and Fang Tiansu were also from the same place as Bai Shi. Shi Mu started to get curious about Bai Shi's hometown. "Brother Huo, my name is Shi Mu. I didn't understand how the senior brother came to know about my chosen cultivation art." Shi Mu greeted the youth. He then asked with a puzzled expression. "Brother Shi doesn't need to be surprised, it's just a coincidence. I had chosen the same art when I had entered this sect. But I gave it up when I realized how expensive a bone-tempering pill was," the straightforward youngster grinned as he said. Suddenly, a thought popped up in Shi Mu's mind as he looked at the sturdy body of the youngster. "Brother Shi, the bone-tempering pill deserves this high price since the bone marrow of an unusual animal is needed to make it. But, it's too expensive for an ordinary disciple to afford. Besides, the art of breeding heavenly elephants isn't as simple and easy as it seems. In fact, it's rather difficult to endure. Therefore, only a few low-ranked disciples have chosen this art," the youngster said as he saw the puzzled expression on Shi Mu's face. Shi Mu's face revealed a bitter smile. The physical state of this person was rather special, it was inconceivable to an ordinary person. "Brother Shi, I've invited Brother Huo for a drink. It would be great if you could tag along with us," Bai Shi said with a smile as he saw them strike a conversation. A trace of hesitation appeared on Shi Mu's face. He knew that the newcomers had only 1 year to escape fights or challenges. Besides, he had obtained the bone-tempering pills now. Therefore, he wanted to start his practice as soon as possible. He was about to turn down the offer when Bai Shi spoke a few words. And these words dispelled his thought train. "Brother Shi, we've just entered this sect. Therefore, if there's anything you want to know about, you can ask Brother Huo." "Well, I don't have any other plans. So, I'll be glad to share Brother Huo's guidance," Shi Mu nodded as he said with a faint smile. "He. When it comes to drinking, the more the merrier." The youngster's eyes glittered with excitement. Then, he took the lead and walked outside without even waiting for Shi Mu to finish his reply. Shi Mu gawked at him. But, Bai Shi blinked at him in a meaningful manner. After that, both of them started to follow Huo Mao. Shi Mu burst out laughing inside his heart as he realized that this senior brother seemed to be a wine-crazy person. They left the aromatic pills pavilion and started to walk merrily towards their destination. They turned 2 crossroads and arrived at a 2-storied restaurant called the Fragrant River Tavern. They reported their names and were quickly directed to a private room on the 2nd floor by a waiter. Shi Mu saw Xiaoming, the youngster with curly hair and a wide mouth, sitting by a table as soon as he stepped into the private room. He had already ordered delicious cuisines. The seal of the wine jar was open as well. Its rich fragrance was spreading in all directions. This made Huo Mao's eyes light up with excitement. Huo Mao occupied the main seat in an impolite manner without any greetings. Then, he poured himself a bowl of wine and finished it in one breath. Nice wine. The chill liquid gushed down his throat and caused a burst of warm energy inside his body. This stimulated him and made him exclaim. Bai Shi poured Huo Mao another bowl of wine and joined him in drinking. Shi Mu and Xiaoming joined them as well. The delicious dishes had been consumed by the end of 3 rounds of drinks. Bai Shi and Xiaoming seized this opportunity and asked a few questions. Huo Mao readily answered every question, and helped the 3 of them to gain a lot of knowledge. Brother Huo, do you know anything about magicians? Shi Mu saw that Bai Shi and Xiaoming's questions were being properly answered. Therefore, he asked a direct question about young Master Zhu and his strange parrot from the general library. He had got an opportunity to gain some knowledge about magicians with great difficulty. Therefore, he didn't want to let this opportunity slip by easily. Magicians? You mean young Master Zhu of the general library? Huo Mao looked at Shi Mu and said with a faint smile. Magicians were quite rare, even in the Black Demon sect. And the only magician that the new disciples had any contact with was young Master Zhu. So, their curiosity was quite normal. Shi Mu nodded. He yearned to learn about those mystical paper charms, strange patterns, and intriguing text whenever he gave them a thought. There was a trace of curiosity on the faces of Bai Shi and Xiaoming as well. They looked towards Huo Mao as they waited for him to answer. Well, as you know, we have thousands of disciples in our sect. But, do you know how many of them are magicians? Honestly speaking, there are just a few hundred. In addition, most of them are mere scholars. If we talk about the spirit-grade magicians like young Master Zhu, then there are less than 8 of such magicians in our sect. And the star-grade magicians of higher level are even fewer in number. Actually, magicians who reach the spirit grade can be considered as official magicians. So, this sect has only 10 real magicians even though it's one of the 7 powerful sects in the 3 kingdoms. Huo Mao deliberately stopped speaking and looked at the 3 people who were gaping with their mouth wide open. He felt contented with their surprised expressions. He then continued, magicians are extremely important for any sect as nothing can be done without their instruments, such as the door of immortality, charms and even their magic formulas. It can be said that magicians determines the real strength of a sect to some extent. Unfortunately, if someone wants to be a magician, then he must have an inborn magical talent. If someone has magical talent, then his spiritual power can induce the strength of various elements needed. People who are born with magical talent are rarer than practitioners who are able to comprehend qi sensing. Huo Mao's face revealed an envious look as he spoke these words. I've heard that young Master Zhu is a spirit magician. What does that mean? Shi Mu had an envious look on his face as well. Suddenly, he remembered something and asked this question. He. I didn't expect Brother Shi Mu to know this much. You've chosen the right person to ask these questions. Other people wouldn't have been able to quench your curiosity. Magicians are commonly divided into 5 elemental categories on the basis of their talent and cultivation practice: wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. Those who have specialization in incantation skills are known as the incantation masters. People who specialize in charm-making skills are known as the charm masters. And, the people who specialize in compounded drugs are known as the alchemy masters. There are a small number of magicians who use wind, thunder, ice, darkness, or light as well. Some magicians can manipulate puppets and are therefore known as puppet masters. The spirit-grade magicians can communicate with creatures from other strange worlds through their spirit power. They are even rarer than puppet masters. Huo Mao revealed a complacent smile as he looked at Shi Mu. Then, he shook his head and continued to explain. He then gulped down another bowl of wine. Bai Shi picked up the jar and hastily refilled his bowl again. Shi Mu had a pensive look on his face. It seemed as if he was pondering over Huo Mao's words. The term magicians had gotten engraved in his heart. He would later find an opportunity to understand the subject of magicians in a thorough manner. Brother Shi, it is a well-known fact in the sect that the fight between you and Chu Kun concluded in a draw. This was a cause for great humiliation for Chu Kun. Don't blame me for not reminding you, but this person Chu Kun is quite ungenerous and not so easy to get along with. You must be careful. Huo Mao changed the topic of conversation as he gazed at Shi Mu with a meaningful look. Brother Huo, thanks a lot for this reminder. Shi Mu's heart felt a slight chill. He cupped his hands across his chest in obeisance as he expressed his gratitude. They continued to discuss some interesting anecdotes. They had finally had enough after finishing 3 jars of wine. Therefore, they bid their farewells and dispersed. Chapter 62, The Moon-Swallowing Art. Translator, Novel_Saga Editor, Novel_Saga. Shi Mu returned to the Aromatic Pills Pavilion after he departed from the Fragrant River Tavern. He bought a few more pills after he had gone through several shelves. The sun had vanished in the western sky by time he returned to his room. The information that he had gained about the magicians from Huo Mao had unfolded an entirely new world in front of his eyes. This was far beyond his imagination. It seemed that Yu Jianji, the senior disciple of the Black Turtle sect who he had met on his way to the Black Demon sect, was also a magician. Yu Jianji had attained the senior star level as per the opinion of the people. His astounding strength had greatly impressed Shi Mu. There were more than 2,000 common disciples in the Black Demon sect. But, only 100 of them were scholar-level magicians. And, there was hardly any chance of Shi Mu bumping into any one of these few magicians. Shi Mu wanted to use his strength to obtain practice resources from the sects. So, he had no other choice but to be prepared in advance. However, he would deal with these matters later. The most important thing for him was to start his practice of the art of breeding heavenly elephants. Shi Mu pulled out a packet from his bosom. Then, he opened it and took out dozens of white and blue bottles. He had purchased some blood-strengthening pills besides the bone-tempering pills. He sat down cross-legged on his bed. He meditated for a while. Then, he picked up a white bottle and flung a blood-strengthening pill in his mouth. He then started to practice the art of breeding heavenly elephants. Shi Mu felt a tremendous growth in the absorption of spiritual energy in his body as the pill melted and spread inside his system. Shi Mu felt contented in his heart. But, he didn't dare to slack off. He continued to transform the wisps of spiritual energy into the real qi. This real qi flowed through his meridians and then gathered in his danshan. Shi Mu opened his eyes after a while. Then, he took a blue bottle and poured a bone-tempering pill in his mouth. The pill turned into a blazing flow of energy as soon as it entered his stomach. This energy started to spread in his limbs and bones. Shi Mu's complexion changed as his skin turned dark red and his muscles started to stick out of his skin. A sound of cracking of bones started to come from the insides of his body. Shi Mu knitted his brows since he felt his entire body burning. He felt an extreme pain. It seemed as if his bones were on fire. This pill was rightly called the bone-tempering pill. Shi Mu sucked in a deep breath and continued to practice the art of breeding heavenly elephants. This made his real qi flow slower, and it became extremely difficult to achieve the desired result under the effect of the bone-tempering pill. Shi Mu's skin was restored to its original color after an hour. The bone-cracking sound also receded then. He was sweating profusely, so much so that his clothes were completely soaked. His body had exuded a layer of black impurities. These impurities emitted a nauseating odor. Shi Mu took off his clothes to wash his body. He felt refreshed after he had taken a shower. A trace of excitement appeared on his face as he moved his body. Shi Mu's real qi had condensed and purified after the tempering session. However, he was more excited about the enormous boost in his physical strength. According to the art of breeding heavenly elephants, the practitioner's strength increased as he progressed to the next level. It didn't seem to be wild talk. Shi Mu continued to practice the art of breeding heavenly elephants in the following days. He also practiced his Gale Force blade art in his leisure time. He knew that the Gale Force blade art was more powerful than the stone-breaking fist art in a real combat. Therefore, he kept improving his 13 series of Gale Force blade along with the progress of real chi within his body. He soon attained the level of 10 cuts in one breath. However, something troubled him endlessly. Shi Mu knitted his eyebrows as he sat at his bedside in the bright moonlight. Shi Mu had been having the same dream of late. The white ape would listen to the old man every time he'd go to sleep under the moonlight trickling down his window. However, he couldn't recall the old man's words when he woke up. Shi Mu started to pace back and forth his room. Suddenly, he stopped. He seemed to have taken a decision. He shoved open the door and walked out. The moonlight was encompassing the entire valley. The people of the valley seemed to be asleep since there was complete silence. Only the sounds of the insects and frogs could be heard. Shi Mu looked around. Then, he started to walk towards a spot with light footsteps. He arrived at an open and spacious place in the woods after a while. It was a secluded place outside the immediate vicinity of the 13th mountain peak. This place was hardly visited since it was far away from the main areas of the valley. Shi Mu examined the surroundings carefully. He felt relieved since he didn't find anyone else around. Then, he started to examine the surrounding trees. Suddenly, his gaze fell on a tall and sturdy tree. He advanced towards it and seated himself on top of it. He then raised his head and stared at the bright moon. He had been busy with his practice since the time he had entered the Black Demon sect. Therefore, he wasn't familiar with every location of this valley. He had been afraid that people might notice his strange behavior. Consequently, he was unable to perform his dream task since many days. Shi Mu continued to stare at the moon for half an hour. However, he couldn't enter his dreamland since his spirit dispelled his efforts. "What's the matter?" Shi Mu's complexion changed as he murmured. Normally, he'd need to maintain this posture in the moonlight to fall asleep and enter the dreamland. However, he couldn't sleep today. Could it be that my ability to enter the dreamland as per my own wish has somehow vanished? Shi Mu felt low-spirited as this thought crossed his mind. This was a strange situation. Shi Mu didn't even know the reason behind his strange dreams and his ability to enter the dreamland. Therefore, it wouldn't be peculiar if he lost this ability. However, there was a huge disadvantage if he lost this ability since he wouldn't be able to increase the range of his eyesight. Its progress had already slowed down. Shi Mu wasn't ready to accept this fact. So, he remained seated on the treetop for another half an hour. But, he eventually had to get down as he didn't succeed. Shi Mu sighed. He was about to leave when he noticed a smooth area in the woods. This area was filled with the silver luster of the moonlight. Moreover, the area looked similar to the place where the white ape would listen to the old man's speech in his dream. Shi Mu's complexion changed, he felt a lightning strike his heart. The ape hadn't been climbing a tree in his dreams. He would sit cross-legged on the ground. So, could it be that? Shi Mu's heart quivered with excitement. He sat down in exactly the same posture as that of the white ape. Then, he started to look in the front, as if the old man was seated there. He had hardly sat for a few moments when a loud bang resounded in his head. Then, his body went stiff. Shi Mu had entered the dreamland in the form of the white ape once again. But this time, he found himself seated on the grass of a mountain peak. The old man with the long and white eyebrows sat in front of him. Suddenly, he raised his wooden ruler and patted the white ape on its head. 1, 2, 3. A thunderous bang resounded in Shi Mu's mind. Several silver lights flickered before his eyes. Then, these lights condensed into small silver words. It was the name of an art. The first 3 words dazzled brightly in Shi Mu's mind: moon swallowing art. Chapter 63, Dreamland reappears. Translator, Novel_Saga Editor, Novel_Saga. Shi Mu felt extremely delighted as he transformed into the white ape. He couldn't help but dance with excitement. He took a strange posture. He raised his hands and grimaced. Then, a bang sound resounded in his mind. Suddenly, the scenery in front of him changed. Shi Mu regained his consciousness. He found himself sitting in an open area in the woods. Shi Mu realized that the dawn was approaching. The eastern sky was suffused with white light. He stood up and looked at the sky. He was startled, so much so that he didn't even pay attention to his clothes, which had become wet because of the morning dew. Shi Mu had seemingly entered his dreamland for a short while. However, an entire night had passed in reality. Shi Mu shook his head. Then, he closed his eyes and started to recall the details of the moon-swallowing art that he had seen in his dream. The result left him dumbfounded. His mind was blank even though he tried hard to recall the dream. He remembered the name of the moon-swallowing art. But, he couldn't remember the practice method of this art. However, Shi Mu knew in his heart that he had comprehended this art. Shi Mu was extremely amazed as he had these strange and contradictory feelings, so much so that he couldn't separate dream from reality. He shook his head as he tried to calm himself down. The sky had become bright. Shi Mu continued to ponder on it for a moment. Then, he stood up and started to walk towards his room. He didn't want anyone to know that he had spent the entire night outside his room. 2 days had passed. It was again a full moon night. The sky was cloudless. The moon looked like a jade plate hanging in the sky. The tranquil moonlight illuminated the entire valley with its chilly silver light. Shi Mu sat cross-legged on his bed in his remote stone house. He was meditating. Suddenly, he opened his eyes. There was a trace of excitement in them. A bright full moon night had finally arrived. Shi Mu quietly pushed open the door and stepped outside. He carefully observed his surroundings for any movement, and listened cautiously for the sound of any activity. The whole valley was calm, not a single shadow could be seen. Shi Mu was finally satisfied. He rapidly advanced forward under the building's shadows. Then, he found his way out of the residential area and arrived at the open area in the woods. He scanned the area as he moved forward. He sat cross-legged in the grass when he was satisfied that no one was around. He felt the caressing touch of the moonlight as he adjusted his breathing to slip into the dreamlike state. Shi Mu's body stiffened after a while. Then, his body relaxed and he became motionless, like an old monk sitting in meditation. He then entered his dream again. Shi Mu's consciousness was awakened by a gust of cold wind. He opened his eyes and found himself incarnated into the white ape. He stood on a strangely shaped silver boulder, his hands were raised and he was grimacing. The moon-swallowing art, these words flashed in his mind. Shi Mu tried to raise his head but he couldn't move, just like his previous dream. However, he didn't care about this, he raised the ape's head instead. He saw that the night sky was shrouded with dense white light dots. This vision was slightly different from the previous one. Previously, these white luminous dots weren't even the size of a half sesame seed. However, the size of these dots was as big as a grain of rice now. They had grown from light dots to light balls. These light balls seemed to have received a mysterious force of traction. They appeared in the sky and started to plummet down one after another into the white ape's golden pupils. New balls of light emerged in the sky as these light balls descended downwards. This process continued for a long time. These white lights seemed like a river that was streaming into the eyes of the white ape as it stood in a strange posture with raised hands. The white light balls didn't disperse once they submerged into the ape's body. They seemed to be under the fetter of some inexplicable strength as they gathered in its mind and changed into a bunch of white fog. These streaks of fog had previously floated inside its mind in a disorderly manner, some groups were dense and some were thin. But, they accumulated in the center of its mind under the effect of a strange force this time around. Then, they started to get smaller and denser. They started to form a group of milky white clouds. They continued to revolve, and gradually contracted into a liquid-like state. It seemed as if this cloud was acting like a vortex. It continued to pull in the newly incoming fog. However, the clouds maintained their initial size, but became denser. Shi Mu felt that his brain had started to swell, as if an icy cold thing had sneaked into his head. But then, an inexplicable sense of cool and comfort gushed from the depths of his mind. It seemed as if he had been immersed in a strange yet miraculous medicine. However, he hardly felt any mysterious change in his mind. He didn't know for how long this process would continue. So, he felt bored. He started to look around as he waited. Suddenly, he discovered that the boulder he was seated on was situated on a high mountain peak's cliff. A boundless sea of clouds surged all around, the wind blew past these clouds gently. There were several dragon pines, it seemed as if they were sticking out in the sea of clouds. Various kinds of exotic plants were spread across the mountain peak. Shi Mu had never seen these plants before. A heavenly spring appeared in the distance. It emanated a sound, it sounded as if tigers and dragons were roaring in unison. The mountain was quite steep. It could be seen rising straight from the earth, as if a green sword was piercing the sky. The cliff where the white ape stood was like the sharp tip of that sword. The green sword-like mountain was surrounded by various kinds of majestic and beautiful mountain ranges. But, none of them were even half as tall as this mountain peak. It seemed that one could grasp the bright moon and stars if one looked up towards the night sky and stretched their hands. Shi Mu was sure that this place had never appeared in his dreams before. However, the white ape had chosen this mountain to practice the moon-swallowing art, probably because this cliff was at the shortest distance from the moon. Shi Mu observed the surrounding area. He didn't know how long it would take for the milky white liquid to take the form of the small white grain in the white ape's mind. A layer of thin white threads continued to wrap around the bottom of the white crystal as the milky white liquid vortex continued to rotate. The white threads made it grow larger. The crystal grain gradually turned into the size of a rice grain. Suddenly, a bang sound thundered inside Shi Mu's mind. A burst of dizziness took over him. Then, everything before his eyes turned dark. Ah! Shi Mu hurled a pitiful scream. Suddenly, he fell back onto the ground. This intense vibration had jolted him out of his dream. Shi Mu woke up to find himself sweating profusely. His black clothes were drenched in a mix of his own sweat and the atmospheric dew. His complexion looked pale. His face was lax, his facial muscles twitched slightly. The thunderous sound in his dream had forcefully exploded in the depths of his soul, so much so that it made his soul shudder. Fortunately, this was a remote place. Moreover, it was close to early morning, this was considered to be the sleepiest time for the average human. Therefore, no one would discover this unusual scenario. Chapter 64, Competition. Translator, Novel_Saga Editor, Novel_Saga. Shi Mu's gaze gradually narrowed. He realized that his body didn't show the slightest trace of exhaustion. His mind was relaxed, a cool and comfortable feeling lingered in his head. He was convinced that some mysterious changes had taken place inside his mind, though he couldn't see them. Suddenly, he thought about the art of breeding heavenly elephants that he had comprehended through meditation in the daytime. Something about this left him dumbstruck. There were some parts of the art of breeding heavenly elephants that he hadn't been able to understand while he had practiced it in the daytime. However, everything about the art had become crystal clear to him now, just with a little thought. This stunning discovery froze him to the spot. However, an ecstatic expression crossed his face. He hadn't expected that the strange moon-swallowing art would exhibit such a wonderful effect in the comprehension of any cultivation art through meditation. He would be benefited if this process continued like this. Moreover, it was easier for him to achieve the first layer of the art of breeding heavenly elephants by drawing support from the bone-tempering and blood-strengthening pills. Shi Mu couldn't repress his urge and stood up. Then, he quickly glanced around. He sneaked into his little stone house once he was sure that no one was around. He then sat cross-legged on his stone bed and started to recall the details of the first stage of the art of breeding heavenly elephants. He gulped down a blood-strengthened pill once he was sure that he had comprehended it. Then, he assumed a meditative posture. He slowly adjusted his breath as he started to induce the spiritual energy from his surroundings. His breath gradually fainted, it seemed as if it had almost disappeared. Shi Mu felt that his body and mind were in their best condition. Therefore, he swallowed a bone-tempering pill and started to practice the first stage of the art. The spiritual energy started to stream and gather within his body like the twinkling stars gather in the sky. Then, the spiritual energy got integrated into his meridians under the guidance of an invisible force. Subsequently, it began to circulate within his body according to a certain predetermined order. The flow of the real qi within his meridians grew stronger with the passage of time. Initially, it was as thin as a hair. But now, it had become as thick as a needle. However, it got separated at a particular intersection of several meridians with a loud explosion. Then, a wisp of real qi as thin as a strand of hair entered a new meridian. Shi Mu was delighted. He had made a few adjustments in the practice method of this art since he had a sudden enlightenment on the evening of the previous day. The adjustment that he had made wasn't special, but it had transformed his slower speed of practice into a newer and faster one. He succeeded in establishing a contact with his meridians after an entire day of practice. He would later on work on the absorption speed of the spiritual energy and increase it. Shi Mu continued to practice the art of breeding heavenly elephants crazily in the following days. It seemed like he had received some stimulation. However, he spared some time to polish his 13 series of gale force art and stone-breaking fist. He continued to sneak out of his house on the moonlit nights. Then, he would proceed towards the open area in the woods to enter his dreamland. He continued to absorb the moonlight, and continued to compress the accumulated moonlight essence in his mind with the help of moon-swallowing art. The size of the crystal grain in Shi Mu's mind had grown from the size of a rice grain to that of a bean in the last 2 months. Shi Mu hadn't yet figured out the exact role of this crystal grain. However, he had been greatly benefited by it. It had enhanced the sensitivity of his thought power. It took Shi Mu 2 months to attain the first stage of the art of breeding heavenly elephants with the help of the blood-strengthening and the bone-tempering pills. The art of breeding heavenly elephants could increase the strength of one's body. Shi Mu's strength had been increased by almost 1/3. He could elevate twice of his original strength with the support of his real qi. Moreover, the skin of his entire body had become quite tenacious. It could be said that an ordinary sword or spear wouldn't be able to easily cut through his flesh if he continued with his practice. Besides, he could wield 3 stone-breaking fists or 2 cuts of the 13 series of gale force art at one fell swoop with the help of the real qi within his body. Furthermore, he could reach the consummate stage of the 13 series of gale force art with the help of the real qi accumulated within his body. He could easily achieve 11 cuts at one breath now. Also, the might of his stone-breaking fist had been elevated. He was startled when he had tested his fist since he had been able to smash a huge megalith into small pieces. Shi Mu believed that he could easily confront an intermediate Hotian warrior like the 5th master of the Jin family with his present strength. But, he was left with only a few bone-tempering and blood-strengthening pills now. So, he needed to purchase a few more. Shi Mu took out a packet and turned it over. Several silver notes fell out of the packet. Shi Mu was left with less than 30,000 silvers by now. This money could last for just a fortnight when considered his current consumption for his practice. The resources that needed to be consumed for the practice of the art of breeding heavenly elephants were beyond the reach of an ordinary person. Shi Mu couldn't have reached its first stage if he didn't have his savings and the support of the moon-swallowing art. Shi Mu smiled wryly. He didn't have any other option but to proceed step by step. He needed to try and find some way to earn money in the Black Demon sect. He put away the silver notes. Then, he pushed open the door and walked out. There was a row of houses for new disciples in the vicinity of the 13th mountain peak. It was crowded to the bustling point at the moment. The new disciples who had been injured by Chu Kun and his group had fully recovered. Most of them had become familiar with the sect over the last 2 months. The young disciples were inquisitive about the Black Demon sect. So, they would loiter outside their houses after their practices ended, except for Shi Mu, who was always busy with his closed-door practice. The other disciples would linger in the valley and squares to understand the ambience of the sect. However, Shi Mu seldom left his house. He wasn't even familiar with most of the new disciples, except for a few people. Shi Mu turned along a street towards the Bluestone Plaza. Suddenly, he heard voice of shouting and cheering coming from the direction of another crossroad. The loud noises seemed to be sourced from a huge crowd. Shi Mu knitted his brows as he realized that there was a specially designed open arena in the direction of the 13th mountain that he once visited with Bai Shi. It seemed that some people were competing in the arena. This arena was specially established for new disciples like Shi Mu. So, it was obvious that the ongoing fight was between new disciples. Shi Mu's eyes flashed as he advanced towards the arena. The ring was a 25 to 28 meters platform made up of green stone. It was few feet above the ground and was surrounded by a black metal guarding fence. Shi Mu noticed that the platform was encircled by 20 or 30 people. The majority of them were primary level disciples. The crowd was divided into 2 groups. These groups were staring at each other with hostility. 2 disciples were fighting with each other in the ring. The tactical situation was very intense. One of them was a young slim boy, who turned out to be Bai Shi. Shi Mu was familiar with him. The other person was a petite young girl. She had short braids, and several silver bells were hanging from her clothes. "It's her," Shi Mu was surprised. This was the same girl who had revealed a strange blood method to dodge Chu Kun's punch on the day of their entry into the sect. That incident had left a profound impression on Shi Mu. Shi Mu and Bai Shi had later made some contacts with girl. Shi Mu remembered that her name was Lan Feng. Both Bai Shi and Lan Feng were eminent new disciples. But, why were they fighting with each other? Chapter 65, Measure for Measure. Translator, Novel_Saga Editor, Novel_Saga. Bai Shi and Lan Feng were fighting each other on the green platform. Obviously, they were on completely different terms as they were 2 months ago. Bai Shi stood in the center of the ring. The muscles of his arms swelled up as he bombarded several punches. Each punch created a gust of air as hot as a blazing stove. The temperature of the arena was elevated because of this. Lan Feng's petite body seemed extremely delicate under the pressure of his punches. However, Lan Feng moved her body in a swift manner. Her waist moved like a snake as she dodged Bai Shi's attacks. It seemed as if a willow leaf was being blown by the wind. Her eyes were fixed on Bai Shi's movements. It seemed that she wanted to exhaust his physical strength. In fact, she was waiting for a chance to make a counter-attack. Bai Shi and Lan Feng were equally matched. It wasn't possible to determine the outcome of this battle in such a short period of time. Shi Mu's eyes flashed as he noticed their exquisite fighting methods. They had seemingly learned a few cultivation arts after entering the Black Demon sect. And, they had surely become Hotian level warriors. The boxing technique that Bai Shi had displayed seemed to be the blazing fire fist. It was one of the martial arts techniques. Also, Shi Mu felt that Lan Feng's swift movements were similar to the shadow arts that he had seen in the general library. It could be deduced from their movements that both of them had reached the first stage of their respective Hotian arts. Therefore, they could easily lift a heavy weight in the competition. Also, they would have had enough condensed real qi in their bodies if they were at the Hotian level. In fact, their condensed real qi must be far more than Shi Mu's. Shi Mu let out a sigh. His wasted bloodline of the stone monkey had blocked his progress to acquire the real qi. Otherwise, he would have easily reached the second stage of the art of breeding heavenly elephants with these many pills and 2 months of practice. Brother Shi, you hardly step out of your room. I haven't seen you for so many days. Shi Mu heard a frank and hearty laughter. A youth with curly hair and wide mouth pushed his way out of the crowd and walked towards Shi Mu. It was Xiao Ming. Xiao Ming's loud words attracted the attention of the surrounding people. Many turned their gazes to look at Shi Mu. A few people who had recognized him started to whisper among themselves. "Brother Xiao," Shi Mu smiled as he nodded to Xiao Ming. They exchanged greetings and stood next to each other. Then, they continued to look towards the arena. Brother Bai is a genius. His real qi has reached such a degree in a very short span of 2 months. Perhaps, he has reached the primary stage of Houtian level, Shi Mu smiled as he said. Brother Shi, you have keen eyes, it was a pretty good observation. Brother Bai indeed made a breakthrough to the 3rd stage of his Yang Gong art 2 days back, Xiao Ming nodded and said with a smile. Shi Mu was startled even though he didn't know the Yang Gong art mentioned by Xiao Ming. He guessed that it must be at the same level as his art of breeding heavenly elephants. Anyone would be startled to hear that someone's reached the 3rd stage of the art within a period of 2 months. This proved that Bai Shi's talent was far superior to Shi Mu's. But what's the matter with Brother Bai and Lan Feng? Why are they fighting with each other? Shi Mu asked casually as he suppressed his astonishment. Xiao Ming's expression changed. A trace of embarrassment could be seen on his face. Brother Shi would laugh at me. Actually, Brother Bai is doing this for my sake. You know that one of my flaming demon tokens was captured by Brother Chu Kun on the entrance day, so, Xiao Ming smiled bitterly as he said. Shi Mu knitted his brows as he was aware of this matter. You've been practicing in your room. So, you don't know that these new disciples are very haughty and ambitious. They've learned some exquisite Houtian arts. So, they can't suppress their urge to try out each other's strength. The winner gets a token from the loser. Miss Feng had won a token yesterday. So, Brother Bai challenged her to a match. He wants to win a token for me, Xiao Ming continued. Shi Mu nodded as he understood the reason behind the match. Bai Shi was a very loyal person, but it wasn't easy to defeat Lan Feng. Bai Shi and Lan Feng were evenly matched. Apparently Bai Shi had an upper hand. However, Lan Feng hadn't yet displayed the full strength of her blood. Therefore, the outcome of this match was unforeseeable. 6 people were watching the match from afar. It was clear from their clothing that they were the older disciples. Among these disciples was Chu Kun of the Blood Dragon Gang, the one who had blocked Shi Mu and other new disciples on the entrance day. He stood there with his 2 fellow disciples. One of the other 3 people was a youth with golden hair and blue eyes. He seemed to be from a different lineage. 2 of his followers stood behind him, one of them was Huo Mao. These 3 people seemed to be hostile towards Chu Kun and his group. Brother Jin, who do you think is going to win this match? Chu Kun sneered as he asked. He was looking at the youth with golden hair. I have heard that Brother Chu had tested these new disciples on their very first day in our sect. This girl with bells on her clothes had evaded your punch with a strange force that day. So, it seems that Brother Chu thinks that this young girl would win. The golden-haired youth didn't reply directly. Instead, he asked an indirect question with a smile. Blood warriors are superior to ordinary warriors. Bai Shi is an ordinary martial arts warrior even though he is quite strong. Brother Jin should have a better understanding in this regard. Bai Shi might have progressed extremely fast to the Houtian level, but that doesn't mean that he would be superior to the other warriors when he enters the Xian Tian level. Chu Kun raised his eyebrows and chuckled as he said. The golden-haired youth snorted coldly. His complexion turned unsightly. Brother Chu, we don't speak in code words. Bai Shi would be the new recruit for our association. We, the Holy Spirit Association, won't get involved with Lan Feng. We won't try to pull her to our side. Do you have anything to say in this regard? The golden-haired youth said in an indifferent manner. Perfect, that's settled then. Chu Kun nodded. Bai Shi and Lan Feng had been on an equal footing for a long time. They had exhausted their real qi by now. So, they were getting impatient. Suddenly, Bai Shi let out a low sound as he heavily stamped his foot on the ground. Then, he leant his body forward and pounded a fist at his opponent. Hot air gushed out of his fist and formed a 10 feet long air wave. Then, his arm swept forward with a faint sound. The hot air wave surged up violently and dashed towards Lan Feng. It nearly swept away half of the ring. Lan Feng swiftly moved aside. However, she couldn't dodge the overbearing impact of the attack and was pushed to one corner of the ring. Bai Shi's complexion had looked pale. However, his eyes lit up as he saw this development. He heavily stomped his foot on the ground and shot his body forward. His palms curled up and took the shape of a pair of claws as his fingertips emitted a cold and faint light. Carved dragon claw. Bai Shi's palms formed a crafty arc as he grasped Lan Feng's delicate throat with a low sound. Lan Feng's charming face turned deathly white, her beautiful pupils darkened. A fine purple light flashed in her eyes. Her hands instantaneously grabbed Bai Shi. Jingle! The bells on Lan Feng's clothes rang as her figure got interlocked with Bai Shi's. Suddenly, her figure flashed and she appeared behind Bai Shi. Her charming face looked rather pale. Her clothes were torn, a long slit had formed at her left shoulder. 5 red scratches could be seen on her bare white arm. Blood was gushing out of these scratches and dyeing her arm red. Her eyes revealed an indignant look. She touched the ground with her tiptoes. Then, she turned around and dashed towards Bai Shi. She shook her right hand. Suddenly, a snow-white dagger appeared in her hand with a flash of a bright white light. Then, she shouted in a delicate tone. Her dagger exuded a cold light as it was flung towards Bai Shi's shoulder. She didn't aim to kill Bai Shi even though she was furious. This was because she was aware that it was just a competition. However, Bai Shi's expression looked strange. He looked ahead with tired eyes as his body remained in situ. It seemed as if he didn't care about the incoming dagger. Chapter 66, Holy Spirit Association and Blood Dragon Gang. Translator, Novel_Saga Editor, Novel_Saga. Dangerous. Brother Bai, dodge it. The acquaintances of Bai Shi who had gathered around the ring called out in alarm. However, Shi Mu's gaze was fixed on Lan Feng. An average person wouldn't have noticed anything when Lan Feng and Bai Shi had intertwined and passed each other. But, Shi Mu had detected several clues. The bells hanging from the clothes of Lan Feng were a bit strange. Maybe, it was because of these bells that Bai Shi had remained standing on his spot. Suddenly, Bai Shi's body quivered and his facial expression returned to its normal state. He had lost his consciousness for a few moments. Lan Feng's dagger had arrived in front of him, and was only 1 foot away from his chest. Bai Shi's complexion changed. Innumerable thoughts crashed into his mind. He quickly tilted his body. However, he didn't draw his shoulder back. In fact, he turned to welcome the dagger. Suddenly, his right hand exuded shockwaves and a cold light emerged from his fingertips. Then, he swept his right hand forward and waved it at Lan Feng's waist with the intention to launch an attack. A trace of alarm flashed in Lan Feng's eyes as she saw this. This unexpected and dangerous attack made her scream in her heart. But, she couldn't stop her momentum. They were about to suffer severe injuries when an orange light streaked from mid-air with a whooshing sound. The orange light turned out to be a group of fireballs, each of which was as big as the head of a person. The light was shot towards the floor of the ring at an incredibly fast speed, it then exploded there. Bang! Bai Shi and Lan Feng were sent flying as a giant airwave surged in their directions, they were pushed back several meters. The audience was startled by these turn of events, so much so that they became stupefied for a moment. Then, they turned their gazes towards the direction from where that fireball had come. They saw 2 people standing there side by side, Shi Mu and Xiao Ming. Xiao Ming's complexion looked pale. His right arm was held out, it seemed to have assumed the posture of pointing forward. The residual of an orange light lingered on his fingertip. Brother Xiao, you, Shi Mu was dumbstruck. Xiaoming looked around at astonished faces. Then, he took a deep breath and put down his arm. "A magician," someone shouted from the crowd. Then, the crowd exploded with excitement as people began to discuss among themselves. Lan Feng's face revealed an astonished look. However, Bai Shi didn't look surprised. He glanced at Lan Feng, and then shifted his gaze towards Xiaoming. "Brother Bai, how could you risk your life for the sake of a single flaming demon token?" Xiaoming forced a smile on his face as he said. Bai Shi wrinkled his eyebrows. But, he had to nod since things had got to this point. He turned towards Lan Feng and clasped his one hand in the other across his chest. He then said, "Miss Lan's blood power is indeed remarkable. It's quite difficult to deal with it. But, we should stop now since our fight has been interrupted." Brother Bai regained his consciousness very fast. "It greatly surprised me," Lan Feng gave a perfunctory reply. The bells hanging from her clothes jingled as she turned around and stepped down from the ring. Chu Kun and the golden-haired youngster had been watching the match from a distance. Their expressions changed as they saw this. Their faces revealed a pleasantly surprised look. "I had never thought that there would be such talented people in this group of new disciples. That guy has learned some magic arts, but the induction force of his fire element was quite profound," Chu Kun muttered. He had barely finished speaking when the golden-haired youngster walked past him along with his two fellow disciples. Then, they advanced towards the ring. Chu Kun's complexion changed as he saw this. Then, he too strode towards the ring with his fellow men. The new disciples were scared of Chu Kun. So, they hurriedly made way for him and the golden-haired boy when they saw them walking over with their friends. Bai Shi had stepped down from the ring. He, Xiaoming and Shi Mu were talking when they saw Chu Kun and the golden-haired youngster walking towards them. Shi Mu felt a cold shiver in his heart as he saw Chu Kun and Huo Mao approach them. However, his facial expressions didn't change. "Brother Bai, I watched you compete that girl. It's amazing that you have made such a terrific progress in such a short period of time," the golden-haired youth greeted Bai Shi with a soft smile. He seemed to be familiar with him. "Brother Jin is flattering me," Bai Shi clasped his hands in front of the golden-haired youngster in obeisance. Then, he nodded to Huo Mao in greeting. "This guy doesn't seem familiar to me. Is he your friend?" the golden-haired youngster asked in a casual manner as he looked Xiaoming. Bai Shi couldn't help but look at Xiaoming. Xiaoming's complexion was still pale. He nodded after a little hesitation. "This is my friend. Xiaoming," Bai Shi said with a smile. "So, you are young disciple Xiao. I met you on the entrance day. Your extraordinary talent left a great impression on me. You are indeed different from an average disciple. But, I had never expected that you would possess magical powers. The induction force of your fire element was pretty impressive. I think your status in the sect will be promoted as soon as your performance is reported to our elders," Chu Kun managed to say with a smile. The golden-haired youngster frowned as he saw this, his complexion darkened. "Brother Xiao's magical powers might have been exhausted now. I happen to be carrying this spirit-strengthening pill that can supplement your magical powers. You don't have to be polite, just accept it." Chu Kun didn't wait for Xiaoming to say anything. He pulled out a delicate white bottle from his bosom and raised his hand to give it to Xiaoming. The golden-haired youngster's facial expression changed again as he realized that the cost of the spirit-strengthening pill wouldn't be less than several thousand silvers. He hadn't expected that Chu Kun acts so desperately to get Xiaoming into his group. Xiaoming's complexion changed. He didn't put out his hand to receive the pill. Instead, he gazed at Bai Shi with a puzzled and hesitant expression on his face. "Hehe, the Blood Dragon gang is very rich and overbearing. But, I've heard that Brother Chu forcefully seized a flaming demon token from Brother Xiao when he entered our sect. In fact, Brother Xiao had narrowly escaped that day. I wonder if this news is indeed true." The golden-haired youth sneered as he hit Chu Kun's sore spot. The surrounding disciples rolled back the curtain of their memories as they heard this. Then, they started to recall the bitter experiences they had on the entrance day. However, they didn't dare to reveal an indignant expression on their faces. They merely looked towards Chu Kun and his two followers in an unwilling manner. Xiao Ming lowered his gaze. Chu Kun noticed the changed look in Xiao Ming's eyes. So, he knitted his eyebrows and slowly retracted his arm. Brother Xiao, we don't need to be secretive. My name is Jin Huan. I'm a member of the Holy Spirit Association. Our group has several talented magicians like you. But, I don't know if Brother Xiao will be interested in joining our association. I'm not a magician. But, there are many people in our association who could help to accelerate the speed of your progress, the golden-haired youngster said earnestly. A splendid martial arts warrior like Brother Bai is also a rare talent. You're welcome in our group as well, the golden-haired youngster said as he turned to look at Bai Shi. Shi Mu stood silently beside them as he listened to their conversation. He had heard the name of the Holy Spirit Association multiple times in the last 2 months. As per his knowledge, this association was very powerful because of its several formidable Houtian warriors. They had even recruited a few scholar-level magicians. However, they didn't have a harmonious relationship with the Blood Dragon Gang's Chu Kun. Chapter 67, A Graceful Refusal. Translator, Novel_Saga Editor, Novel_Saga. Brother Xiao, our Blood Dragon Gang has 2 magicians. So, the matter of mutual exchange won't be an issue. And you'll be entitled to receive some free pills every month if you join our gang. This spirit strengthening pill is one of them, Chu Kun hurriedly said as he saw Xiao Ming getting convinced by Jin Huan. Brother Xiao, the Holy Spirit Association also provides various kinds of pills like the spirit strengthening pill to our magicians every month, for free. We also have a practice manuscript of a spirit-grade magician. It belonged to one of our senior disciples from many years ago. You can borrow it at any time if you join us, Jin Huan said proudly. An envious expression could be seen on the faces of the surrounding disciples as they saw 2 major associations compete to convince Xiao Ming to join them. However, Bai Shi stood beside his friend with a smile on his face. He was genuinely happy for his friend. He had even forgotten that his moment in the spotlight had nearly been snatched by Xiao Ming. A manuscript of a spirit-grade magician. Xiao Ming was exhilarated. He turned his gaze and looked at Bai Shi for support. Bai Shi remained silent. However, he gave him a slight nod. Chu Kun was furious. He shouted in his heart for his bad luck. He was about to say something when Xiao Ming's voice burst out. Senior Jin has invited me very earnestly. So, this younger brother won't turn down his offer. I'll be glad to join the Holy Spirit Association. Jin Huan was delighted as heard this. Brother Xiao has taken a sensible decision. You won't regret it. Now, may I ask whether or not Brother Bai intends to join our association? The golden-haired youngster asked with a smile as he shifted his vision towards Bai Shi. I'll be glad to be a part of your association since my friend Brother Xiao is also willing to join it, Bai Shi replied with a smile. The golden-haired youngster felt delighted as he heard his reply. This left Chu Kun in an awkward position. His embarrassment took away the color of his face. His complexion became as dark as a black pot. However, he couldn't launch his counter in front of so many people. Suddenly, he caught a glimpse of Lan Feng. She was conversing with a girl in the crowd. His eyes brightened up. A trace of a smile appeared on his face as he walked towards her. Miss Lan, long time no see. The magical power of your blood seems even more exquisite than before, Chu Kun said with a smile. Senior Chu is overpraising me, she turned her head and replied in a cheerful manner. Miss Lan possesses an outstanding natural talent. You should be ranked among the best of the new disciples. Oh, by the way, may I know what you have decided regarding joining our Blood Dragon Gang? Chu Kun asked with a smile. Well, that, Lan Feng's vision moved. However, she didn't reply immediately, it seemed as if she was still considering the proposal. Miss Lan, I've a piece of advice for you. There isn't any difference between your current strength and that of the other new disciples. But, your strength will progress once you get help from some external force. Practicing by yourself won't be beneficial. After all, it's very difficult to achieve something great without anyone's help, Chu Kun stated in a dignified tone. Lan Feng's beautiful eyes flickered as she cast her glance towards Bai Shi and Xiao Ming. She hesitated for a while. But then, she seemed to have taken a decision. She replied with a smile, "This young girl won't dare to turn down such a genuine offer since Senior Chu has invited me again and again, it would be very disrespectful." "Great! Sister Lan, the president of our Blood Dragon gang happens to be in the valley today. Let's go and meet him. Our leader is a heroic person who upholds justice. He would be delighted to know that an extraordinary blood warrior like you is willing to be a part of our group." Chu Kun made the invitation in a cheerful manner. Lan Feng didn't hesitate. She turned around and walked towards the mountain valley with Chu Kun after she had exchanged a few words with the girl she had been talking to. The golden-haired youngster snorted contemptuously as he saw Chu Kun walk away. Then, he turned around and continued to talk with Bai Shi and Xiao Ming in a low voice. The other disciples departed with despondent hearts since there was nothing left to witness. Shi Mu too felt awkward. So, he bid his goodbye to Bai Shi and turned around to leave. "Brother Shi, hold on for a second," Bai Shi's eyes flickered as he called out to stop Shi Mu. Then, he turned around and whispered a few words to the golden-haired youngster. The golden-haired youngster looked at Shi Mu with glimmer in his eyes. Then, he walked up to him. "So, you are Brother Shi Mu? I heard from Brother Bai that you possess an uncommon strength. He said that you are a blood warrior as well. You are the one who had firmly received Chu Kun's punch on the entrance day. You may join our Holy Spirit Association if you wish," the golden-haired youngster stated in a generous manner. Shi Mu was dumbfounded. Numerous thoughts bubbled up in his mind as he tried to reach a conclusion. Finally, he clasped his hands across his chest respectfully and said with a smile, "Brother Jin has overpraised me. I was born with great physical strength. I have practiced a physical art that has made my skin very tough. That's why, I was able to receive Senior Chu's punch. But, it's mere a superficial strength. In fact, I don't possess any remarkable talent. So, I am afraid that I might disappoint Senior Jin and Brother Bai." He smiled apologetically as he looked at Bai Shi. A surprised look crossed Jin Huan's face. However, he didn't lose his temper because of Shi Mu's refusal. He said instead, "All human beings have their own aspirations. So, I won't force you to join us." It was useless for him to strengthen a low-grade blood warrior's body. Therefore, he didn't go so far as to invite Shi Mu again and again. Bai Shi let out a sigh as he saw that Shi Mu had refused the invitation. However, he didn't say anything. He turned his head and joined Jin Huan and others in conversation. Shi Mu was struck by a variety of feelings as he saw Xiao Ming, Bai Shi, and others being indulged in a passionate conversation. He felt disheartened. Then, he turned around and walked away. However, he had only covered a little distance when a person's voice was heard from behind him. "He. Brother Shi, wait a moment." Shi Mu turned around to see a youngster with rough facial features approach him. That youngster was Huo Mao. "Senior Huo, I had never thought that you would belong to the Holy Spirit Association," Shi Mu said with a smile. Shi Mu hadn't harbored a favorable impression of Huo Mao because of his addiction for wine and straightforward nature. "There's nothing to be so proud of. I only run errands for the association," Huo Mao waved his hand as he replied. Shi Mu was startled. He was about to say something when Huo Mao let out a sigh. Then, he looked around and said in a whispering tone, "Brother Shi, you have joined this sect recently. So, you aren't aware that both the Holy Spirit Association and the Blood Dragon Gang are very powerful groups. But, you won't get anything from them if you don't have an extraordinary talent. You'll be pushed aside. In fact, you may even get bullied by others. I personally suggest that you decline every call to participate in the gang fights, if needed. You might as well stay away from all the groups and practice by yourself. You will enjoy more freedom this way. I personally think that Brother Shi did the right thing by refusing the invitation. Senior Huo, thanks a lot for your guidance, Shi Mu nodded and said in a soft voice. Shi Mu had declined Jin Huan's invitation for two reasons. Firstly, he was reluctant to rely on a condescending help because of his self-respect. Secondly, his refusal had stemmed from the same consideration which was made clear by Huo Mao's words. After all, his practicing speed was restricted because of his wasted blood. His practice would have been further hampered if he were to use his precious time and energy to assist his group. Senior Huo, please excuse me. I have something to do. So, I'll take my leave. I'll certainly invite you for a cup of drink the next time we meet. Shi Mu looked in the direction of the Bluestone Plaza as he said. Hee. I think Brother Shi wants to go there to buy pills, right? What a coincidence. I have to go there as well. Let's go together, Huo Mao said with a soft chuckle. They started to chat as they walked towards the Bluestone Plaza. Brother Shi, I didn't ask you before, where do you hail from? The price of the pills required to practice the art of breeding heavenly elephants is not cheap. Could it be that Brother Shi belongs to a respected family? Huo Mao asked inquisitively. Chapter 68, The Hall of Wealth. Translator, Novel_Saga Editor, Novel_Saga. Shi Mu forced a smile on his face as he heard Huo Mao's words. He had consumed several thousand silvers worth of pills for his practice in the past 2 months. However, he had only reached the first level of the art of breeding heavenly elephants. His growth rate was clearly slower than that of Bai Shi, Lan Feng, and the other new disciples. This weighed a considerable amount of pressure on his heart. Moreover, the wealth that he had received from Aunt Zhen and the fifth master was gone. However, he would need more pills to practice the second level of this art. In addition, he had inquired about the demon chi which was essential to practice the art of breeding a strong evil ape. He had come to know that the demon chi was sold in the sex market. However, its price was much more than that of the bone-tempering pill. How could I belong to a respected family? I entered this sect purely by chance. I have nearly spent all my money. Now, I've luckily bumped into you. So, I better take your advice. The sect provides a small ration per month. But, is there any other way a disciple can earn money in our sect? Shi Mu forced a smile as he asked. Something had suddenly crossed his mind. Therefore, he asked this question in a curious manner. Huo Mao shot a surprised look at Shi Mu. It seemed as if he couldn't believe what Shi Mu had said. How could a person even think of selecting such an expensive art when he didn't have a strong financial background? Brother Shi, you can go to the Hall of Wealth if you wish to make money. It's located between the 12th and the 13th mountain peaks. Various kinds of jobs are available there for both the ordinary and the janitor disciples. The jobs that can't be performed by the janitor disciples are suitable for primary disciples like you, Huo Mao replied thoughtfully after a little hesitation. Seriously? Is there a place like that in our sect? Huo Mao's words ignited a flame of happiness in Shi Mu's heart. Brother Shi, you must have been busy in closed-door trainings. Otherwise, new disciples like you should be aware of this place by now, Huo Mao burst out laughing. Haha, maybe. I rarely go out these days. Otherwise, this information was unlikely to stay obscured. Shi Mu felt slightly embarrassed. However, he suddenly set a firm resolve in his heart. He had decided to become friends with others in order to avoid such embarrassing situations in future. They chatted as they advanced towards the Bluestone Plaza. Then, they bid their farewells and went their separate ways. Shi Mu spent nearly all of his remaining money to purchase the bone-tempering and blood-strengthening pills. Then, he left for the 12th mountain peak. He soon arrived at a magnificent 2-storied building, it was situated between the two mountain peaks. It was noon, the sun was at its peak and shining brightly. The dark main hall was glowing due to the intense and dazzling sunlight. There were 2 entrance doors to the hall. These doors were several feet high and were wide open. Several black-robed ordinary and janitor disciples strolled in and out of these doors in endless streams. The Hall of Wealth. These words were written in huge bold letters on a wooden plaque which was hung over the entrance door. Shi Mu narrowed his eyes and gazed at the wooden plaque. Then, he walked towards the entrance door. A cool breeze caressed his face as soon as he entered the front door of the hall. He saw a short passageway in front of him. It was lined with butter torches that had thick handles. These torches were positioned on either side of the passageway, at the interval of every 10 feet. The torches' flames illuminated the passageway as they swayed in the wind. A faint buzzing sound could be heard from the other side of the passageway. Shi Mu advanced forward without any hesitation. He saw a turn in the passageway after he had walked a few feet. He followed it. Suddenly, his eyes were dazzled by strong lights. He had entered a huge and spacious hall. It was several dozen feet long and 20 feet wide. Butter torches were lined along its surrounding walls. Therefore, the entire hall was as bright as daytime. A dozen large screens could be seen in the middle of the hall. More than 100 disciples of the Black Demon sect were scattered around these screens. Their exclamations, murmurs, footsteps and discussions had led to the faint noise that Shi Mu had heard earlier. Most of these screens were filled with several rows of blue and black words. The majority of these words were written in black. Only a few of them were written in blue. Shi Mu noticed the black-robed janitor disciples as they entered the main hall and wrote something on the screens with the required color brush. Some janitor disciples held uncolored brushes in their hands. They swept these brushes on the screen from time to time. The black and blue words disappeared as they did that. Shi Mu walked to an obscure corner and started to observe the situation. Shi Mu noticed a black-robed janitor disciple as he removed a row of words from the screen. Then, he transcribed a new row of black words on the blank spot. 4 primary disciples surrounded the screen as soon as the janitor disciple finished writing. One of them shook his head as he read the line aloud. The black-robed janitor disciple had barely put away his brush when a primary disciple approached him. That primary disciple had a birthmark on his left cheek. Then, the two of them got engaged in a conversation. The janitor disciple nodded and fished out a black token from his bosom. Then, he gave the token to the primary disciple with the birthmark on his face. The primary disciple's face beamed with excitement as he received the token. He then turned around and departed. After that, the janitor disciple took out a red-colored brush and swept it across the black words. A red flame-shaped mark appeared on top of the black words. Shi Mu realized that only the black words had red marks, the blue words were barely marked. A few rows of words had been marked by 2 red marks. A ray of clear understanding flashed through Shi Mu's eyes as he deciphered it. He then moved towards the nearest screen. The first row of black words had attracted his eyes. 3 30-year-old holy wind grass wanted. Reward 3,000 silvers. Time limit 3 months. The high reward made Shi Mu's eyes glimmer even though he didn't know anything about the holy wind grass. He moved to the next row. It was about some kind of herbal medicine. It didn't have any time limit. But, the reward was only 500 silvers. It seemed to be some kind of a long-range mission. He moved to the next screen when he had finished reading the first one. Shi Mu heaved a sigh of relief after he had finished reading all the 20 rows of the black words within a few minutes. Most of the tasks were meant for alchemy magicians and charm magicians. The reward offered for these tasks was better than others. Even the most ordinary magicians were paid several thousand silvers for taking up a simple task like maturing a field of holy plants. The rewards for slightly complex tasks which were designed for higher-level magicians were paid in holy stones. It was a known fact that even the most low-grade spirit stone could be easily exchanged for 2-3 million silvers. Moreover, these spirit stones were so rare that one would never come across them in the market. The spirit stones couldn't help a warrior in his training. However, they were priceless to a magician since they could absorb his spiritual energy and transform it into his magical power. Moreover, a number of magic circles and magic formulas couldn't be made without a spirit stone. Shi Mu felt extremely envious of magicians as he thought about their money-making abilities. He wouldn't have to worry about the money required for the practice of his art of breeding heavenly elephants and art of breeding strong evil ape if he were a magician. Suddenly, a thought struck his heart: Xiao Ming was a magician. He started to wonder about the possibility of practicing magical arts. After all, he had never tested his talent. Shi Mu was aware that a few disciples in the sect practiced both martial and magic arts. Chapter 69, Forging Iron. Translator, Novel_Saga Editor, Novel_Saga. Shi Mu pondered over the grandeur of being a rich magician for a while. Then, he shook his head and cast this thought aside. The innate skill needed to become a magician was quite rare. Therefore, the possibility of him possessing that skill was extremely low. He needed to focus on finding a task that suited his presently known abilities, a task that rewarded him at the earliest. Most of the tasks mentioned on the screens were related to the collection of some kind of rare and precious herbs or minerals. A few tasks related to assistance required on some special arts, some other tasks needed help with some of the day-to-day problems. The rewards offered for these strange tasks were 5,000 to 6,000 silvers. Shi Mu felt discouraged as he compared this reward with that of a magician's. A few tasks were described in blue-colored words. The rewards they offered were considerably higher. However, the difficulty level to perform these tasks wasn't low. A group of people would be required to complete most of these tasks. Some of these tasks even offered the unattainable flaming demon token as reward. Unfortunately, Shi Mu couldn't complete these tasks on his own. Suddenly, his facial expressions changed. He walked towards a screen as his eyes fell on a row of black-colored words recruiting a vigorous Hotian warrior to forge 200 pieces of refined iron, reward 90 silvers per piece. Shi Mu had possessed a strength of 500 kilograms even though he hadn't practiced any Hotian art. He had now made a breakthrough to the first stage of the art of breeding heavenly elephants. Therefore, his brute strength had increased by 30 to 40%. He could push it even further. He was to draw support from the real chi that he had accumulated by the practice of this art. Therefore, this task was suitable for him. It also offered a good reward. There were several red marks on this row of words. This meant that this task had been taken up by some other people as well. However, the task hadn't put any limit on the number of mission takers. Shi Mu beckoned his hand in the direction of the main hall's counter. It was quite distant from the place where he stood. A black-robed janitor disciple walked over after a moment. Shi Mu had a black-colored iron token in his hand a moment later. An image of fire was imprinted on its back, while number 73 was carved on its front. Shi Mu smiled mildly and walked out of the hall. It was noon, the sun was showering its scorching light over the valley. A blazing flame was roaring inside Zhao Ji's blacksmith shop. This had made the temperature of the shop extremely high. 3 sturdy young men were resting and enjoying the cool air as they sat on either side of the doorway. "Brother Lin, it seems that we can forge 100 pieces of iron today," a diminutive yet sturdy youngster said with delight. "Right. We can forge 50 more pieces this afternoon. Then, we'll be successful in getting 9,000 silvers. So, each one of us will be entitled to 3,000 silvers, another youngster with a soybean-sized mole on the corner of his mouth spoke up. Then, he smiled as he turned his head and looked at the 50 iron pieces that had already been forged. These 3,000 silvers were insignificant in comparison to the several thousands that were offered by harder missions. However, those missions could take a considerable time. More than a day or even half a month wouldn't be enough to complete some of those tasks. Therefore, the reward of 3,000 silvers a day was exceptional from that perspective. No one can earn this money since this task is too difficult for ordinary people to complete. We have strengthened our bodies with the help of special medicines since childhood. So, Our physical strength is more than an average person's, a dark-skinned youngster rubbed his sore and tired arms as he said. But, this work is too exhausting. So, we'll have to rest for a few days after we've forged those 100 pieces of iron. The words of the dark-skinned youngster aroused the sympathy of the other two men since their bodies were also aching. The task of forging iron was quite tiring. Moreover, the temperature in the blacksmith's shop was extremely high. Each piece of iron needed around 300 strikes of a hammer that weighed more than 100 kilograms, only then could it be forged. Their sweat would stream down their bodies as they'd work. This had forced them to take rest at regular intervals. These three youngsters were new disciples, and had been recruited by the Black Demon sect in the current year. They had a good relationship with each other since they used to practice their body-strengthening cultivation arts together. Therefore, they took up this task together in the morning. They had then arrived here. It seems like another person has taken up this task, the dark-skinned youngster wrinkled his brows as he said in a low voice. The other two youngsters turned their gazes and saw Zhao Ping, the owner of the shop, leading a strong and tall disciple towards the shop with a smile on his face. Humph! I'm afraid that he'll give up and quit after he sees the difficulty level of this task. Moreover, how will he compete with the three of us? Let's try harder and forge as fast as possible, the guy with the mole snorted and said in a low voice. After that, he got up and walked towards the shop to continue his work. The other two youngsters also stood up and followed him. Then, dang sounds of forging iron started to resound. The slightly plump owner of the shop stopped in front of the door and turned his head towards the tall young man. Brother Shi, put the refined iron chunks behind you once you're done with forging them. If the quality is up to the standard, then I'll pay you 90 silvers for each piece. As far as the iron token that you have is concerned, I'll take care of that when the time comes. I will return it to the Hall of Wealth. The sturdy and tall disciple was obviously Shi Mu. Well, thank you so much, Senior Zhao, Shi Mu nodded and replied respectfully. Then, he strode towards the blacksmith's shop and vanished inside. A wave of heat hit Shi Mu's face as he stepped inside. He saw a huge iron furnace. 5 or 6 shirtless men were working around it. They didn't seem to be affected by the extreme heat. An iron forging platform was located near the furnace. It was made of cast iron and was 20 feet long, 10 feet wide and 2 feet thick. 3 sturdy and semi-naked youngsters were gathered around the platform. Sweat dripped from their bodies as they wielded the huge hammers to forge the red-hot iron. The facial expressions of these 3 men didn't look friendly. They were looking at Shi Mu with anger in their eyes. However, their bone-piercing glare didn't have any effect on Shi Mu. Shi Mu looked around and discovered 50 dark refined irons behind the 3 youngsters. His heart skipped a beat as he remembered that the task posted in the morning had requested to forge 200 iron pieces in total. However, 1/4 of these iron pieces had already been forged by these youngsters in only half a day. His vision explored more of the surroundings. He found 2 huge hammers kept in a corner. These hammers were similar to the ones the 3 youngsters were using. Shi Mu walked towards the corner without taking off his shirt. He then grasped one of the hammers with his right hand. He waved it a few times as if the hammer was as light as a twig. This brought a faint smile on his face. The iron hammer weighed more than 100 kilograms. This meant that one had to have 250 kilograms of strength to lift it. However, Shi Mu lifted it without even using his real chi. One of the shirtless men working near the stove grabbed a piece of refined iron with a pair of large tongs. He then placed it on the iron platform. Shi Mu walked towards the platform as he saw this. Then, he pounded his hammer down fiercely. Dang! An ear-piercing sound rang out as he pounded the hammer. It was followed by sparks that showered around from the spot where the hammer had hit the red-hot iron. Consequently, the iron piece got slightly bent. There was a trace of amazement in the eyes of the 3 youngsters. This guy's strength is off the charts. They would have taken at least 3 strikes to have such a tangible effect on the same iron piece. The complexion of Zhao Ping, the owner of the blacksmith's shop, changed as he saw this. He felt quite pleased. He knew that the greater strength Shi Mu had, the quicker the speed of his work would be. The task would have taken until the next day to finish if he had relied on those 3 men alone. But now, there was a possibility that the task may get finished ahead of its scheduled time since Shi Mu had joined them. Chapter 70, Flaming Beast Group. Translator, Novel_Saga Editor, Novel_Saga. Shi Mu didn't seem to care about the strange looks that he received from the surrounding people. Instead, he wielded his hammer and started to forge a red iron piece. His repetitive strikes led to a dang-dang sound which started to resound in every direction. The sound produced by his continuous hammering attracted the attention of the surrounding people. They noticed the blue veins that were popping out of his arms. This indicated that he was forging without using his real qi. He seemed to be depending solely upon his demonic strength. Moreover, he wielded a 100 kilograms hammer as if it was as light as a feather. This forced the surrounding people to suck in a deep breath. The iron piece seemed to have been refined after 100 or more strikes, its impurities had been thrashed out. The piece had been reduced to 10% of its original size. The redness had faded from its surface, it appeared black after extrusion. A shirtless man stood near the furnace, he swallowed as he saw this. Then, he stepped forward and stopped Shi Mu with an awe-stricken expression on his face. After that, he grasped the refined iron piece with his big pliers and put it behind Shi Mu. Shi Mu beckoned to another sturdy man who stood close to the furnace. That man hesitantly grabbed another piece of glowing red iron and placed it in front of him. Then, Shi Mu wielded his hammer once again. The 3 youngsters gaped at each other as they saw Shi Mu's speed of forging a piece of iron. A restless expression was spread across their faces. The owner of the shop was also startled as he saw this. However, his face beamed with a cheerful smile since he felt quite satisfied with Shi Mu's speed. Shi Mu moved to forging the 5th piece of iron after he had forged 4 pieces in continuation. There were no traces of fatigue on his face. However, the 3 other youngsters had exhausted themselves in the process of forging a single piece of iron. They were sweating from all over their bodies. They gritted their teeth as they stared at Shi Mu in a malicious manner. Then, they pushed their real qi and continued to work without taking any rest. The 3 youngsters eventually took rest after they had reached their limits. However, Shi Mu was still forging his 12th piece in succession. He was in high spirits since he was aware that 1 piece of iron would pay him 90 silvers. This meant that he had earned around 1,000 silvers in only half an hour. The complexion of the 3 youngsters had turned pale, they looked at Shi Mu with a look of disbelief in their eyes. They eventually lost their confidence as they saw Shi Mu forge the iron unceasingly without taking a moment's rest. The sturdy and semi-naked workers in the shop were extremely excited since this was a rare sight. They started to bet on the number of iron pieces Shi Mu would forge before taking rest. One of them guessed 10 pieces, the other said 15. However, the boldest of them dared to predict 30. Meanwhile, the owner of the shop had quietly arrived near the forging platform, he stood just a few feet away. He watched Shi Mu's movements with a dignified look on his face. However, Shi Mu didn't pay any attention to his surroundings. His mind was completely focused on the red iron piece placed in front of him. It required lots of skill and attention to forge an iron piece. So, one could forge an iron piece with minimal effort and high efficiency only by focusing one's attention and maintaining a proper pace. Shi Mu finished forging his 102nd piece and noticed that the forging furnace had been closed. This meant that the required number of pieces had been forged. He raised his head to find the 3 youngsters sitting on the ground in a corner, they looked completely exhausted. The 3 of them were staring at Shi Mu. Even the sturdy blacksmiths were staring at him as if he was a monster. Shi Mu was puzzled at the sight of this. Then, his eyes fell on the owner of the shop, his face was gleaming with excitement. Shi Mu walked towards him and spoke with a smile, "Brother Zhao, it seems that the task has been completed. What about the pay?" "Oh, it was a big help," here are your 9,200 in silver notes." The owner took out 9 notes of 1,000 silvers and 2 notes of 100 silvers. He then handed them over to Shi Mu. He seemed to have prepared this payment in advance. "As far as the 20 silvers are concerned, you don't need to return the change. Consider that I have paid you in a round figure." The owner beckoned with his hand and stated as he saw Shi Mu fumbling in his pocket for the change. "Thanks a lot, Brother Zhao." Shi Mu was little surprised. But then, his eyes glittered with joy. He received the silver notes without any argument. "I am Zhao Ping. It's my first meeting with Brother Shi, but I have a feeling that we'll get along very well. By the way, I noticed that you forged more than 100 pieces of refined iron without using your real qi. You possess an extraordinary talent. You must be a very talented person with an impressive physical strength and vitality. May I ask something, is Brother Shi interested in joining our Flaming Beast group? Several disciples in our group practice different kinds of body-strengthening arts. Myriads of free pills are provided to them every month. In addition, we share several Houtian level arts. These arts can help you to progress exponentially as compared to others." That too before next year's competition, the owner made a loud noise and spoke these words as he saw that Shi Mu was preparing to leave. "Is Brother Zhao a member of the Flaming Beast group?" Shi Mu was surprised. "Yes. Our group is very strict regarding our prospective members in comparison to the Holy Spirit Association and Blood Dragon Gang. The resources that we provide are more favorable than others. So, please consider it. You know, it's almost impossible to progress quickly when one depends solely on their own self." Zhao Ping looked at Shi Mu in a sincere manner. Then, he spoke these words to persuade him to join his group without waiting for him to speak. The eyes of the 3 youngsters gleamed and their bodies turned fiery as they heard these words. They wished that they could somehow substitute Shi Mu and accept this invitation. The disciples who aspired for body-strengthening arts yearned for the power and support of the Flaming Beast group. Such disciples often visited the blacksmith's shop. And they had 2 reasons to do so. Firstly to make money, secondly to get closer to Zhao Ping. This was because they knew that this shop belonged to the Flaming Beast group. So, they could get a chance to enter the group by using Zhao Ping as a ladder. Shi Mu didn't give a quick response even though the 3 youngsters had expected him to. Instead, he sank into a deep thought. The offer was indeed alluring. He believed that the Houtian level body strengthening arts would increase his chances of winning the next year's competition. He had chosen 2 cultivation arts simultaneously. Therefore, he had been desperately looking for Houtian level martial arts techniques to enhance his strength. Moreover, his desire to practice these techniques had increased after he had watched the match between Bai Shi and Lan Feng. In addition, the competition would start after 1 year. His performance in the competition would determine whether or not he would gain a foothold in this sect. So, Shi Mu couldn't afford to lose this chance. "Brother Zhao, you are flattering me. I merely have a strong body with rough skin. Also, I have been practicing arts that strengthen my body. So, I seem to be relatively stronger than others. But, the fact is that my strength is superficial. So, I'm afraid that I might fail to live up to Brother Zhao's expectation." Shi Mu smiled apologetically as he declined the offer. Shi Mu was dying to accept this offer. However, he knew that there was no such thing as a free meal in this world. Moreover, he hadn't forgotten Huo Mao's advice about the dangers of joining groups in the sect. Therefore, he had refused the invitation after a second thought. The 3 youngsters couldn't believe their ears as they heard this. They looked at him as if he was a fool. Zhao Ping had intended to urge him again. However, he dropped the idea because he saw a very determined look on Shi Mu's face. He swallowed back his words and shook his head regretfully. He didn't say anything. Shi Mu didn't repent even though he regretted his decision somewhat. He didn't wish to stay there any longer since he had been sweating profusely. It was quite uncomfortable for him. He clasped his hands across his chest and bid goodbye to Zhao Ping. He then departed from the blacksmith's shop.